In any industry, you're always going to have different ways that you can measure success, and there's very rarely one perfect way. I had a solid 3 or 4 years as a teenager when I was really into movies, and I remember that I was interested in the movie box office. The box office being how much money a film makes while it's in movie theaters, and there's really two main box office metrics that you can look at. There's the domestic box office, which is how much money a movie makes in America and Canada, and the international box office, which is how much money a movie makes around the entire world. And when I was a teenager, I was always far more interested in the international box office because it just made sense to me that taking into account everyone that watched a movie would be a better indicator of success and popularity than just focusing it down to the part of the world that I live in. However, I now understand that pretty much all box office analysts care significantly more about the domestic box office, that is the US and Canadian box office, when gauging a movie's performance, especially when comparing between different movies, because it is consistent. A big problem with using the international box office to compare movies against each other is that so much of a film's gross at the international box office has a lot to do with what countries are even accepting movies from Hollywood in the first place. Whether or not your movie is good is probably going to have a much smaller impact on the international box office than just is China accepting American movies right now. You don't have those weird geopolitical considerations when you're just looking at the US and Canada, which is why the domestic box office is so much more consistent and reliable when gauging the performances of movies, though not without its own flaws. Again, you're only looking at its success in the markets where generally the biggest movies are created. I probably spent more time on that than I meant to. The point is, there's not just one way to measure success in an industry, and yet it feels like the video game industry is so set on measuring financial performance via units sold, just how many copies of the game were sold. And I don't really have a problem with that. I think that's a very reliable way to gauge the success of a video game. I don't think there's a lot of drawbacks or asterisks when viewing it that way. But it doesn't paint the whole story, which is why a much better way to get the full story behind the success of a product is to look at and combine different success metrics together to see what areas something might be failing in while being successful in other areas and what greater story does that tell. Today we are going to look at the attach rates of Mario games. The attach rate, if you don't know, is how many people who own a specific game console also bought that video game that goes with that console. So for example, if 20 people own your video game console and 10 people bought a video game for that console, that game has an attach rate of 50%. That's a very solid number. But then if 1,000 people bought your video game, but there's 1 million consoles sold, your attach rate drops down to 0.1%. Much less impressive attach rate. This catches a downfall of unit sales, where naturally, a game is probably at a disadvantage with how many unit sales it can reach if it was on a less successful video game platform. So, here's what we're gonna do today. I need you to hear and believe me when I say that I was not expecting the first 2 big Jason Boxman videos back to be spreadsheet-based videos. Some people think I'm a Smash guy, some people think I'm like a Star Wars guy or a Xenoblade guy. I'm a spreadsheet guy. What I'm gonna do first is create a list of every mainline Mario game as well as any Mario game that just felt like a big deal or sold a lot. You know, the videos I'm used to traditionally doing on YouTube, benefit of them is that I have an idea, I research the idea, I script it, I get to know before I even start to make the video if my hypothesis or my question leads to a satisfying or interesting end result. But here, I have no idea. We could find out that the most successful Mario games from unit sales are also the most successful with attachment rates. I have no idea if this is going to be interesting or not, but I'm pulling you along with me. And there we go. We have our top selling Mario games by unit sales. Let's go ahead and create a filter so we can sort this data. I should have said this more clearly at the beginning of the video, but the numbers I'm writing for unit sales are in millions. So Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did not sell 60 units, it sold 60 million units. Sorry if this is how you found out. Alright, what's our top 5? Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, we knew that. Mario Brothers, Mario Kart Wii, New Super Mario Brothers, New Super Mario Brothers Wii. Okay, that's not too surprising of a list, but it does highlight something that some of you might have caught already. The first thing that we absolutely need to highlight, in fact I literally am going to highlight these, is we're going to go through and highlight which of these were a pack-in title. Not because we're going to exclude those, but obviously if you're sold with the console, that's a bit of bias that should be taken into consideration. Felt like I was missing one. Get in here, 3D Land. And what do you know, a lot of Mario games were pack-in titles. Reasonable minds will differ on what exactly counts, because a lot of these had like special event, limited release type things. I didn't count those. Generally, if it came out relatively early in the console's life and it felt like a long-standing product that they wanted on shelves as like a default way to get the system rather than a special way, that's what I have highlighted in yellow here. Next step is super simple. We just gotta label which system each of these were on. Okay, it's a little funny that I have Super Circuit on here, but not a Mario platformer. We'll throw Mario vs. Donkey Kong on here just to give the GBA a little more love. Oh, I don't know if I want to do this, actually. That is not a very impressive number. Oh, I really like this game. I hope I don't end up being mean to it. What is our most represented console on here? 3 for the 3DS, 3 for the DS, 4 for the NES. That makes sense. That's boring. Oh, wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the Switch, 5 for the Wii U? Oh, I accidentally labeled Mario Maker 2 a Wii U game. There we go. I always double check your work. Is there any Switch game that shouldn't be here? I was very generous to the Switch. 8 Deluxe, Odyssey, you wonder. It's because... Okay, it's because of all the re-releases, and it's because we had 2 big 2D platformers on the system, 3 if you count Maker. It makes sense, it's fine. You know what, I know how we'd be a little bit nicer to the GBA. By the way, I chose a poor website to do this on, because for the titles, they just use the logo, which is like flashy and all that, but that means I can't just Control F for what I want to look for. I have to search for all of the Super Mario Advance games. What we are doing right now is known in the business as overscoping. Oh, was Super Mario Advance 3, was that Yoshi's Island? Is that why it's not coming up? Yeah, it was Yoshi's Island. All right, so we're not doing Advance 3. Last step to calculate our attachment rates is we need to write down how much each of these consoles sold. That's how you get a percentage. Now, if this were a real spreadsheet that you were being paid money to create, you'd want to come down here and you'd want to like create like a table with like all of the numbers on it. And then you would use this table to fill in this information automatically, but I am not getting paid to do this, and that requires a little more brain power, even though it is a better way to do it. I'm just gonna write them by hand. All right, we have everything we need. We have the console sales, and I added this category for what genre each game belongs to so that we can sort by just the Mario Kart games or just the platformers. And I have decided, did I do it already? No, here you are, right here. We're going to get rid of Dr. Mario because that way we just have platformers and racing games. I did consider some Mario parties for this, but I think this is simpler. And also that Dr. Mario number I found, I believe, was the series aggregate sales, not just Dr. Mario on NES, which is what I thought it was. Anyway, we can now calculate the attach rate of all these games. Actually, before we do that, our top games by unit sales, we talked about already: Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario Brothers, Mario Kart Wii, New Super Mario Brothers for the DS, our top game that was not a big pack-in title, although I did think it had some bundles, and New Super Mario Brothers Wii. And we can see naturally a lot of our top games are landing on Nintendo's top best performing systems, Switch, NES, Wii, DS, because a lot of people owned those systems. My hypothesis for attach rate is, first of all, I think the number 1 game is going to be Mario Kart World. Switch 2 has been out for less than a year. I think that means disproportionately it's mostly super hardcore Nintendo fans that have it, and of course most of them are going to want Mario Kart, especially because that is the only big Switch 2 Nintendo exclusive except for Donkey Kong. But after that, I do think, and I hope for the sake of an interesting video, that we see Mario games on less successful Nintendo hardware having a higher attachment rate. And I think that would make sense because a smaller install base means that, like, still obviously the hardcore Nintendo fans are going to show up for all the major Nintendo hardware, and just that like more core casual audience, maybe the kid audience, didn't resonate with the console as much. Although core and casuals would also buy a lot of Mario games, whereas you have some hardcore Nintendo fans who are like, no, I'm a Metroid guy, I'm a Xenoblade guy. Now, I want to stick to it. I think like GameCube and Wii U, I think we're going to see some solid attach rates on those platforms. Let's find out. Let's convert those to percents, add that to the filter, and what is our new top 5 most successful Mario games according to attach rate? Mario Kart World number 1, that was an easy guess. We got Super Mario Brothers for the NES, Mario Kart 8, and 8 Deluxe. Wow, okay. And 3D World for the Wii U, and right under that is New Super Mario Bros. U. Yes, okay, Wii U coming in strong on attach rate, because only Nintendo fans were buying it. And then at the bottom, poor GBA. I'm so sorry I did this to you, GBA. Why were Mario games so unpopular on the GBA? Hold on. Wow, my numbers aren't off. GBA games just did not do spectacularly unless you were Pokemon. Wow, that is a fascinating topic in and of itself that I'll have to look into one day, why nobody bought GBA games. But if we go above the GBA games, we have DS, we have Wii, we have Switch, so those big consoles do start to falter, but at the attach rate. Although Bowser's Fury was a port, that explains some of that. Galaxy 2, though. 7% of Wii owners had Galaxy 2, and I don't think Galaxy 1 did that better. No, 12%. I want to add some more specificity to our genre section here, and then we're going to visualize this data a bit. I'm glad to see Mario Maker on Wii U in the top half. I was worried the Maker games weren't going to perform very well. I just included them because I like them so much. Hey! Wow, Mario Maker 2 did awful! No, I really want them to do a Mario Maker 3 of some kind. Dang it. Mario Maker 2 doing second worst behind Mario vs. Donkey Kong. That is not the news I wanted to hear today. The big budget 3D Mario with the best attach rate is 3D World. That's okay, that's the power of a low install base. That's similar with 64. The N64 didn't do that great either. Something that is jumping out at me immediately is when we sort by attach rate as compared to unit sale. Yeah, when you switch to attach rate, and this makes complete sense, the pack-in titles shoot way up the charts. Because it doesn't matter how many of your consoles are out there, it just matters how many people who own your console own your game, and if it was a pack-in title, it's gonna be a lot of people. But I've boosted our genre category a bit to include, separate between classic 2D, modern 2D, and 3D. We're going to make some charts here to see any patterns we can find with this. So we can see here when we compare attach rate versus unit sales, there is a slight trend upward, meaning that the higher your unit sales, the higher your attach rate. Although it seems like the Mario games with the strongest attach rate do live more towards the beginning of the graph. It's just that as you move along, these early laggers, these GBA games, are holding it back. Since these are both success indicators, it would make sense that they would correlate in some way. If you're selling more units, you are being attached more inherently. And you can see just how much Mario Kart World is such an outlier right now. And it's not gonna hold on to that crown forever as the Switch 2 sells more units. I assume it could, I don't know. So it's amazing that really the king is still the original Super Mario Bros. With a 65% attach rate. Nothing has topped it yet in terms of console owners all buying a big Mario game together. But you do gotta give special congrats to 3D World for pulling off that 43% without even being a big pack-in title. In fact, 3D World is really the only platformer that performed at a noteworthy level without being a pack-in title. The other big notable ones were both Mario Karts, Double Dash and 64. Since I am hyping up 3D World a little bit, we should mention, just for some extra transparency, that the Wii U, when it originally launched, had two different versions. The basic white Wii U that had 8 gigabytes of storage, and the deluxe Wii U, which was black, had 32 gigs of storage, and came with the pack-in title most people are familiar with, Nintendo Land. About a year after that, Super Mario 3D World released, and about 1 year after that, Nintendo released a new bundle of the deluxe version of the Wii U specifically that came with Nintendo Land and Mario 3D World. Since it was 2 years after the console's launch and 1 year after the game's launch, as well as also being part of the deluxe set specifically, I didn't think that was a strong enough case to highlight it as a pack-in title, but that's an example where I think the extra context is worth saying, so you can make up your mind on whether or not that counts as a pack-in title. Okay. What we've done here is we have 3 new categories. We have the total number of units sold for each genre. So karts are at almost 200 million. And then classic, modern, and 3D are all relatively close to each other. We have about 110 million up to 130 million. We have the number of games in each category. Again, interestingly, pretty similar, between 8 and 10 games per genre. And with those two numbers, we can get their averages. So on average, kart racers are on top with 19 million, almost 20 million. Average sales, which if you pay attention to game sales, that's not surprising. You know Mario is a kart racing franchise first. And you also probably know that 2D Mario almost always outdoes 3D Mario. 3D Mario sitting in last place with 12 million average sales. Although congrats to the modern era of 2D Mario. The modern era of 2D Mario on average outselling the classic era. I'm not sure if I would have guessed that. And you can see here, if I delete the GBA games, and I also deleted the Maker games, some of our weakest performers, they are almost dead even with the modern games, just barely. The modern games sell on average, what is that, like 1,500 more copies than the classic games if you take out the advanced games and the Maker games, with the GBA games counted as classic and the Maker games counted as modern, of course, just so that's clear. And then we can just copy and paste and do the exact same thing for the attach rate. And wow, okay, the kart racers seem to pull ahead even a little bit further, 36% average attach rate. There's no question the kart racers are the most popular no matter how you look at it. That gives us this chart here. So I think my hypothesis was right that games on worst performing hardware do get a boost in the attach rate category, although not like significantly. They don't completely dominate over the popular consoles. The Wii U in particular did a good job, which makes me happy. But another result that I wasn't really expecting out of this is that when you look at attach rate, the kart racers become even more dominant than they do by unit sales. But the platformers, the classic era, the new Super Mario Bros. Era, or the 3D games have like a negligible difference. They all do like about the same, which that is not really the case in unit sales. You have to get through 3 2D games to get to the biggest 3D game, which is Odyssey. Odyssey was honestly a bit of an outlier. 3D Mario usually doesn't do that well. Then you have to go through 5 2D games to get to the next 3D one. Then there's a bit of a sea of 3D. Again, just to be sure, let's take out the GBA games that performed horribly, and we'll take out the Maker games because Mario Maker 1 and 2 have relatively weak stats in general. There we go. I was completely wrong. I never should have given the GBA any credit. Well, maybe I should have given the GBA credit because it is a legitimate part of Nintendo's history. But if you remove the GBA, Classic 2D shoots up way higher, which that makes sense to me because back in the Classic era, those 2D Mario games were the Mario games. Grandma didn't have to go to the store and pick between Galaxy, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, or Mario Kart Wii. You just got Mario 3, and everyone was happy. Getting those outliers out of there also means that 2D Mario gets so much closer to the kart games in terms of average unit sales, and it really leaves 3D in the dust. But even though modern 2D catches up on unit sales, it falls behind pretty dramatically in attach rate. So the modern 2D games might sell well, probably because they're on really successful hardware like the DS, the Wii, the Switch, but they're not attaching as strongly, and I think that makes sense. The huge casual hits of Mario today are the kart racers, and the critical darlings that you and I probably love the most are the 3D games. Modern 2D Mario just doesn't have its market cornered the way it used to make it this dominant force that everyone needs to own. Not to pat 3D Mario on the back too much. Sales were never 3D Mario's strong suit. Until Odyssey. Honestly, GameCube too. When you go by attach rate, N64, GameCube, and Wii U all shoot up a generous amount. Double Dash and Sunshine are in the top half. The Wii U games dominate. Mario 64 becomes a champ, and Mario Kart 64. Interesting how abysmal the attach rates of the Mario Land games are. I guess people really were just playing Tetris and nothing else on their Game Boys. Tetris and Pokemon. I think the biggest takeaways here are when you're looking at attach rate, the number of console owners who bought a game, it does make sense to me that the weaker hardware would have higher attach rates because there's a denser concentration of hardcore Nintendo fans. I think this is also why Mario Kart World is absolutely dominating less than a year after its launch. Using these two different ways to measure success shows that the unit sales that modern 2D Mario gets seems to have a lot more to do with being on successful hardware rather than being super popular hits relative to their hardware. And it also shows that while historically the Mario Kart games and the classic 2D Mario games have on average sold about the same, especially when you combine all eras, the kart games by far are more popular relative to their console. No matter what Nintendo console you're looking at, the kart game is probably owned by a healthy percentage of the people that own that console. And with that, ultimately, I think the two main things I wanted to accomplish with this video are achieved. Number one, I wanted to illustrate why it's valuable to measure success by using multiple different metrics, how multiple different success metrics can show you different parts of one complete story. And also, I was really just hoping like a weirdo Mario game would like rise through the ranks and like show itself to be an unexpected hit in a category that not many people expect. And you can call that Mario Kart World if you want. I'm partial to call out 3D World here. It's on the Wii U, so its unit sales are terrible, but a huge powerhouse in the attachment rate category. Wii U owners showed up for 3D World, which is interesting. If you were around when 3D World came out, you'll probably remember that that game was not met with overwhelming hype and praise across the board. Certainly not loved in the same way it is today. And also, I released this video with apologies to anyone who is a fan of GBA Mario, myself included. If you happen to have any guesses for why GBA Mario games just did so abysmal compared to how Mario usually does on other platforms, I would be so fascinated to hear that. And thank you for bearing with me through double episodes of spreadsheet-related content. I promise they're not all going to be that way. Unless you want them to be.